Thank you, everyone. My name is Catherine Wells. I work with the Snohomish Conservation District, and I'm here tonight with my colleague Whit Barrett, one of our farm planners, and Alayne Blickle from Horses for Clean Water. Tonight, we're going to be talking about eco-friendly ways to control mud and manure on horse properties, and then ways to keep your horses mentally stimulated and happy, particularly during the rainy, dark months, when they might get a little bit bored. Um, so let me go back. Snohomish Conservation District is just one of many conservation districts across the country. Some of you here might not be from Washington. If you are in Washington, you have a conservation district near where you live, and if you have questions, please put them in the chat and let me know if you want to find out. That is also how we will talk to each other during the webinar, is using the chat function rather than the Q&A. So conservation districts provide free technical assistance and financial assistance to land managers. So residents who have land, we work with people who don't have their own land as well, but they are like managing the land. So even if you have a balcony and that's all you got, we're happy to work with you. Today we're working with people who have horses. Maybe you're boarding, maybe you have your own horse property. This information is helpful for all of you. We help with pasture, weed, mud, and manure management. Our services, WIT services, our other farm planner services are provided free of charge because we get grant funding, and then we're also funded through a small portion of property taxes. We do all kinds of other things as well. I won't get into those right now. But let's move on. Whit, would you like to share some information about the things that we learned tonight and how we might be able to provide financial assistance?
Of course, yeah. Thanks for having me here. Thank you all for being here. I'm Whit Barrett. I'm a farm planner and agroforestry planner on the ag team here. And so, as Catherine was saying, we have a lot of services here at the Conservation District, and we can also help to connect people to funding opportunities through the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So while we are a local agency based in Snohomish County and on Camano Island, we can help connect people to resources that are offered by the federal government through the NRCS and FSA. And those funding opportunities are for people who are managing cropland, pasture land, forest land, so a wide range of production types, whether you have livestock or crops or other things. But these are competitive programs, so you would sort of enter an application process and have your projects ranked to receive funding from the federal government. And all of that requires registering with the FSA. So those are things that we can walk through with you. And I think there's more information about a couple of these projects or a couple of these programs that I'll get into for just a moment. So the first major program that people can be eligible for in the area is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP. So I'm also going to talk about the Conservation Stewardship Program, but the difference that I want to distinguish between these two is that EQIP is typically for people to implement practices in the first place. So these are essentially best management practices that are outlined by the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And then CSP would be to sort of maintain or enhance existing practices you've already implemented. So a helpful way to think about this is kind of you can chain these programs together. You can use EQIP to get practices implemented on your land, and then those practices will be under contract for a certain period of time, and then you would be able to transfer to the Conservation Stewardship Program to continue getting payments from the government for maintaining those practices. EQIP is a cost share program. I think it covers up to 75% of the implementation, and then CSP is sort of flat payments based on what you're doing. And then we'll have one more slide about the kind of process for this. So as I was alluding to, there are these applications that essentially run through the NRCS and FSA, but we can help you to direct you to the resources that you need to fill those out, and also help you through the farm planning process and identifying best management practices for your property, and just kind of orient you around these programs that can be really complicated to navigate. So it can be a lengthy process, so reach out whenever you feel ready to start asking questions and getting more information, because it will take time. But it could be worth pursuing if you have livestock, if you have horses, if you have other activities that you're doing on your land, and you want to get resources to help you to care for natural resources on your property. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Whit. I wanted to mention that tonight we have not tonight, on Saturday, October 11th, we're going to have a farm tour at Warm Beach Camp and Conference Center. They have a stable and run a program for, I think they have therapeutic riding and various other kinds of lessons and competitive training, that kind of thing. But they've worked with us for a while on trying to find ways to manage mud and manure in a kind of a challenging location. So please come if you can. It's south of Stanwood, Washington, Saturday, October 11th, 10:30 to noon. I will send everybody a follow-up email with a link to register for the farm tour if you haven't registered already. I will also send a link to the recording for tonight's webinar. And later on, there will be an article that describes a unique way of composting manure fairly quickly. So Alayne will be talking more about mud and manure management tonight, but we won't have time to get into all the different methods and systems for composting manure. And we've got one more method that I'll send out to you at a later date. I wanted to mention that one of the reasons that we talk about mud and manure management, in addition to animal health and chore efficiency, is for clean water, to make sure that we have clean water. The program that we're working on right now as part of this webinar, as a part of this program, is the Lower Stillaguamish Pollution Identification and Correction Program. That's a mouthful, and it basically means that the Lower Stillaguamish River, south of Stanwood, from maybe I-5-ish to Port Susan and South Skagit Bays, has too much fecal bacteria in the water. There are shellfish in those waters, and when when the shellfish they're filter feeders, and when they take up too much fecal bacteria into their bodies and you eat the shellfish, it can make you sick. So we try very hard to help people keep fecal bacteria out of the water with information and technical assistance for septic system owners, for people who have pets, and people who have livestock. And tonight we're talking about horses. And the big three things that people can do are install a covered manure storage structure to prevent contaminated water from reaching waterways. So rain hits a manure pile and can run off into a nearby ditch or stream. Covered manure storage is very important. You can install a heavy use area which protects your pastures from damage in the winter months, but it also gives you an opportunity to pick the manure regularly and get it composted. And then we ask that people fence horses and livestock away from streams and ditches. And as Whit mentioned, we have financial programs in addition to the ones like through NRCS that can help people implement some of these things if there are if they meet certain qualifications. And part of that means, if you're near a stream, for example, and there's a concern that there might be some pollution. So if you do practices like these, it can help your horse and your farm be healthier and cleaner, but it can also reduce the amount of fecal bacteria in our streams, rivers, and marine areas where shellfish grow. Now first of all, I want to thank our partners. So Alayne, thank you very much. Alayne is with Horses for Clean Water, and we thank them for partnering with us on this today. Also thanking Snohomish County Surface Water Management and the National Association of Conservation Districts for partial funding for tonight's program. I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I will turn it over to Alayne. And again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat.
Okay, great. I will share my screen. And it's happening, right? You guys see my screen?
Yes,
All right,
we
great.
sure do.
All righty.
Cynthia, you have a question, your hand raised. Let me unmute you. Yes, Cynthia?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. I don't know if I'm the only one, but the chat is disabled.
The chat is disabled. Oh, we specifically enabled that. Okay. Can you try let me try to enable it. And then if I cannot do that, let's see here. Everyone. Okay.
Oh, there we go.
There
Hello
we
to
go. Does that
all.
work? All right,
Yep.
great. Thank you for letting us know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, so let's see. All right, so what I'm going to talk about tonight is I'm going to tell you about, we're going to talk about mud and manure. We're going to focus on our confinement areas, often called heavy use areas, or sacrifice areas. In the old days, we called them that. And we're going to talk about mud management and manure management, as well as ways to change those areas so that it provides more enrichment opportunities for our horses. But before we get started, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about myself, because I want you to know, where my expertise comes from and why I'm here talking about horses and horse keeping and land management. So I have an undergraduate degree in natural resources, and then a graduate degree in media production and journalism. And I've worked for 30 years in this field. And I started out I live in Idaho now, which I'll show you a little bit about. But I lived for 30 years in Western Washington. And I started working with the King Conservation District. Like, these guys are with Snohomish and I was with King. And I worked on staff with them. And then I eventually started working with so many horse owners, because it was kind of a new thing to be working with horse owners and small acreage livestock owners at that time. So I started my own business of Horses for Clean Water, and then I contract back with the King CD and really with all of the CDs in Puget Sound, and eventually in different states and different areas. And so basically I get to horse around for a living. A little bit more about my background. So we're definitely horse people, my husband and I, and Matt's a trainer and an instructor, and we did reining for over 20 years and competed in reining, and Matt's still a judge in NRHA, but we've now transitioned to ranch trail and ranch riding and are really enjoying competing, learning those skills and competing in that. And a little bit about our place here in southwestern Idaho. The reason why I like to explain this a little bit is that it might give some other people some idea of what you can do with some of these things that we're talking about tonight, and how you can put them on your property to sort of monetize your property as a selling point. So our place is Sweet Pepper Ranch, and we do boarding. Matt teaches lessons and clinics. We have a glamping tent, which you see on the lower right-hand side there, that we rent out in the summer. And then we also do overnighting horse motel for people traveling with horses. And our selling point for all of it, or our main point, is that we are doing environmentally, or attempting to do environmentally sensitive horse keeping practices. So in essence, it's mud, manure, pasture management, wildlife enhancement, water conservation, chemical use reduction, firewise, and all these things we're trying to put in place on our property and showcase those practices. So my business that I mentioned, it's Horses for Clean Water. And what that means is that I teach classes, I do workshops, farm tours, I develop educational materials. I also write for equestrian publications, and it's all about nature-based solutions for horse keeping. That's what I call it. That's the easy way to think about it. And oh, I should mention that all of my practices that I'm teaching, they're all based on the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, on their what are called best management practices. So it's all based in science. And those are at the heart of what we're teaching. Okay, so the clean water part of my name, Horses for Clean Water, is that dirty runoff from a horse property can cause a lot of problems. So you can get dirty runoff from mud, from horses in their confinement areas if they're not managed correctly, from mismanaged manure piles, from overgrazed pastures. I mean, all these things can cause a lot of problems. And the bottom line is it can cause water quality issues. And we call this runoff, we call it non-point pollution, because it's not specific. It's sort of diffused across a big spectrum of things that can contribute to poor water quality. And the runoff from horse properties, which can be sediment and nutrients from manure and fecal coliform, like Catherine was mentioning, these things can impact the health of fish and shellfish and other aquatic life, as well as other wildlife that depend on riparian areas. That's the areas around streams and ponds and wetlands. And these things can actually soak into the ground and can contaminate our wells for those of us who are on a well on rural property. So clean water is really important. It's critical. And Horses for Clean Water teaches about ways to keep the water clean so that and to take care of our land so that our property is going to be good for horse health, good for chore efficiency, good for the productivity of our property. It's going to improve the aesthetics of our property so that it's a place that we can be proud of and that our neighbors can be pleased with. It's going to help save us money. And it's also hopefully going to conserve natural resources like soil, water, air quality. Okay, so let's jump into tonight's presentation. I'm going to do two presentations, and this is the first one. So in this presentation, I'm going to focus on mud and manure management, primarily on our confinement areas. And this picture here, we lived in Maple Valley when we lived there, and that's a before and an after picture of our property. That top one is literally what our place looked like when we moved in right before Thanksgiving. And the lower picture is probably like 10 or so years later. And I like to point out that, it took a long time to get to that point, because when you do a farm plan or when you're trying to implement these practices, it's not like we're saying you have to do this today, tomorrow, by the end of the year, 6 months or something. It's a goal, I think. Being environmentally sensitive or trying to be sustainable, it's a goal that we all have, and we rarely ever feel like we're completely there. There's always something that we can do to improve it, but it's something that we're working towards. So I'm going to talk about 5 ways that we can reduce mud and runoff in our heavy use areas, our confinement areas. I'm going to talk about what a confinement area is and how to establish one. I'm going to talk about picking up manure regularly and composting it, although there's other ways to manage manure. I'm going to talk about footing. And footing is the material that you want to put in your confinement areas for the horses to stand on so they're not standing on bare soil and causing more erosion and creating mud. I'm going to talk about gutters and downspouts because they're really like the cornerstone for mud management. And then I'm going to talk about diverting and managing surface flows. And by this, I mean the water that runs across the surface of your property. So like if you're near a hill and water's running down the hill, we're going to talk about different things like how to manage that situation. And again, all of this is based on NRCS recommended best management practices. Okay, so what is mud made of? It sounds like a funny thing to start out with, but I think if we want to manage mud, we got to know what we're dealing with. So I always say that mud is composed of 3 things, and that is fine organic material, and then it's going to be mixed with soil and water. So that's 3 things. And the fine organic material can be anything like manure, it can be shavings, it can be bedding, it can be spent hay. And then we have rainwater and then the soil from our property. And when you mix those 3 things together, that's when you have mud. The fine organic material all 3 of those things are critical to creating mud, but the fine organic material is kind of one of the things that I always refer back to because it's part of why we put manure in gardens, because the fine organic material holds moisture super well. It holds something like 200 to 400 times its weight in water. So you want that fine organic material because it's like a sponge. But you don't want fine organic material in your heavy use area, your high traffic areas, or your confinement areas, because it's going to hold that water there and just create more mud. Okay, so let's start talking about my 5 points. My first one is to establish a confinement area, or heavy use area is another name for it. In the old days, we used to call it a sacrifice area, and the NRCS has recently changed the wording to heavy use area or confinement area. And we called it a sacrifice area because you were sacrificing this piece of ground as a grassy pasture, as a grassy area, for the sake of the rest of your pasture. And so you recognize that grass is never going to grow in this confinement area. And you also recognize that you're going to have to do things to mitigate and manage it so that you don't end up with a lot of mud and manure in that confinement area. And the reason why we advocate having this area is because, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, or when you have smaller acreage, if you have your horses out on pasture in the wintertime, the grass plants are dormant. The growing season is like 120 days. So the horses are going to graze it down, and the plant is not going to be able to grow back until the following spring. And then in the wintertime, pretty much any place that you live, you have precipitation, either snow or rain, and that is going to make the soils soggy. And when soils are soggy and you put anything heavy on it, like horses or equipment or anything else heavy, it's going to compact it, push the air out of it, and create more mud. So we've got to have a confinement area for the wintertime for our horses. And then we also use the confinement area in the summer so that our pastures don't get overgrazed. It's where we put our horses when our pastures get grazed down to about 3 to 4 inches in any time of the year. And it's where we put our horses in the wintertime when our soils are soggy and saturated, and we want to avoid turning them into mud. Okay, so what we want to look for establishing our confinement areas is we want to find an area, if possible, with good slope and a grassy buffer below. So the slope is to provide some drainage so that the sacrifice area or confinement area drains. And then where you want it to drain to is into grass or some kind of vegetation. So the grass actually becomes, this vegetation area actually becomes high tech. It's actually a best management practice. And it's called a biofiltration area. And that means that any nutrients from this confinement area or sediments from like mud or manure, they're all going to get filtered out by that grass. The grass needs water, it needs nutrients, so it's going to utilize that. And so it'd be good to have pasture below your confinement area. It'd be good to have lawn. It'd be good to have native vegetation. It would not be good to have a parking lot or a cement surface, because then the runoff from this confinement area would pool in that area. It would not be good to have your neighbor's property right below, because then any runoff from this confinement area is going to run right into their property. And like you wouldn't want to have a swimming pool below it or anything like that, because you're going to get more runoff from that confinement area, and you don't want that to go someplace where it's going to cause problems. So confinement areas can be individual, like this one. This young lady was in her 80s when I took the picture, the woman who owned this place. And she had ponies that she drove, and she had them all in individual pens. She would turn them out in the middle of the day. I think I might have pictures of her property in the enrichment portion of tonight's presentation. But she kept them for meals like breakfast and then again for dinner. She kept them individually, and she liked that, so she can monitor their health. She can make sure they're eating and drinking okay and defecating okay. I mean, some people like that, or it can be in a group. We have one confinement area that we have 2 horses in, and some people have confinement areas, you know, that are larger than that. Here's one. This is in Woodinville, Washington, and he's got Frisian horses, and his confinement area doubles as an arena too, or a big round pen. But his horses are in individual stalls at night, and then out in the confinement area during the day, or on the pasture if the weather is good. You want to have your confinement areas designed for chore efficiency and equine enrichment. This is a great example here of a chore efficient paddock. They've got, we'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about footing, but they've got larger gravel in one side and then sand in another side. Horses like to urinate in sand because it's less likely to splash, and they also like to roll in sand. So, you know, that's an area that horses would enjoy, but the gravel footing is easy to pick up manure. And then they have an area where they feed the horses that's covered so that, you know, the hay or doesn't get wet and the horses can get out of the weather. And then they can also access the pasture from here. So it's a very well thought out, chore efficient, and horse centric design. And track paddocks we'll cover later, but basically they are a way that horses can move around more and, you know, kind of go on a little trip around the property and see different things. And it kind of motivates them to keep them moving because you can have feed and water in different areas. Okay, that's confinement areas. Let's talk about manure and manure management. So you want to be sure to pick up manure on a regular basis. Horses produce about 50 pounds of manure a day per horse. And we talked about mud and fine organic material. So manure is composed of fine organic material. And if we don't pick it up, besides having a lot more fly habitat, we're also going to have more mud once it gets rained on. So 50 pounds a day adds up pretty quickly. We clean all of our paddocks, our confinement areas, our high traffic areas where we walk or the horses walk, all of our arenas, round pens, parking areas. We pick everything up once a day. But we have like 10 horses at our place. So once a day is a lot of work, I guess, for us. But I have horse friends who have, you know, like one horse or two or three horses, and they will actually clean twice a day. And they like to do that because it's easier and faster, and the horse hasn't had a chance to walk through it and grind it in. So whatever works for you, I recommend at least picking up the manure at least every 3 days because some species of parasites hatch as frequently as every 3 days. So if you pick it up, then you'll be helping to break that parasite reinfestation cycle. But honestly, you know, you'll reduce the amount of flies you have and the amount of mud if you can pick it up once a day. Here's some graphics I had made about the parasite reinfestation cycle. So horses are grazing, and when they're grazing is when they're likely to pick up the parasites in the larva form. And then once inside of the horse, or it's true for all livestock, once they're inside the animal, they change into the adult form, and then they shed eggs. The eggs pass out in the manure. Once outside of the horse, they can hatch as frequently as every 3 days. It's microscopic larvae that you have, and they crawl around on the ground, and they're hardwired to try to find something tall to climb up. And then your horses are grazing in manure contaminated areas, and they re-ingest those parasites, and the cycle is repeated. It's going to be particularly easy to repeat if they're in an overgrazed, manure contaminated pen with wet grass, because that facilitates the movement of the larva. And then if you don't pick up the manure, you end up with not only manure parasites reinfesting your horse, but also with a lot of mud. So manure buildup equals mud. And this is an example of a place in Snohomish County that I visited, and they had just built a new confinement area, and they put in this expensive gravel. It was perfect. They had 2 big draft cross horses in it. And I came back a month later, and they had not ever picked up any manure, I don't think. And this is what it looked like. I mean, it was just solid manure and gravel. So what that means is if they wanted to make it, you know, their only choice at that point to make it mud proof would be to scrape all of that out, including all of that expensive gravel, and start over again. So when you pick up the manure, I recommend composting it. It's my favorite option, and it's actually really pretty easy to do. And you end up with such a valuable product when you do that. And conservation districts and NRCS have great designs for compost bins that they can give you for free. And they've got a lot of different ideas for compost bins. The upper left-hand side, that's NRCS design. It's like the absolute Cadillac design because it's got a roof over it. And we do always recommend covering compost, particularly in the rainy parts of the world, because the rain is going to leach out the nutrients that you want to save, that you want to have to reapply back to your pasture. So you don't want the rain washing it out and then having that cause a problem for somebody else. So you want to cover it to keep those valuable nutrients in your pile and not let your compost pile get too wet and soggy. So the advantages of composting to horse owners is that it's going to kill the worm eggs and the parasites and the pathogens and the weed seeds. It's going to kill the majority of them. I mean, none of us are like commercial composters, so it's not going to kill 100%. But it's going to do a good job of killing most of them or a lot of them. So it's going to reduce that parasite reinfestation. It's going to reduce flies. It's going to reduce odors, because the composting process should not smell bad. It smells good. It smells like soil. If it smells bad, it means something's not working. And then when you compost, a really cool thing is that it reduces the volume of material. So if you start out like with a 6-foot high pile of material, it's going to compost down half of that, about 50%. So you'll end up with 3 feet of material. And that's a lot easier to deal with 3 feet of compost than 6 feet of stall waste and manure. So it provides you with a free, easy, and super valuable soil amendment that you can use on your place or you can share with your neighbors. The reason why we as natural resource agencies like composting is that it does a lot of really cool things for the environment. It improves the health of the soil. It changes the nitrogen in the manure so that it can be better utilized by the plants. And once it's fixed like that, then it can't get washed out by rain, or it's less likely to get washed out by rain. Then if you spread fresh manure and it gets rained on, it's going to wash off of your pasture. But if you spread compost and it gets rained on, it's less likely to get washed off. And compost, it's like a multivitamin, and it has a lot of micro and macronutrients that are slow acting and time released. I mean, there's studies that show the value of applying compost, which goes out 5 years and 10 years and maybe even longer than that for just one application of compost. Compost also adds microbes, beneficial bacteria and fungus. Then it has the fine organic material, which holds the soil moisture. And all of this just makes plants healthier, more disease resistant. And another important thing is that it helps with droughty times, and it helps us as horse people moving into having, climate resiliency, because it's going to help our pastures get through those droughty times if we've got compost on our soils. So the compost process, a little bit about how to compost. Compost is, if you think about it like something growing in your garden, that'll help you for managing it. So it's going to, like, you know, lettuce or broccoli, it needs air and it needs water. And it actually needs a bit of water. It should be end up being, your compost should be as damp as a wrung out sponge. And what you're doing is you're feeding those microbes, the bacteria and the fungal organisms, and they have got to have dampness. You don't want it so it's super wet and you've got runoff. That's too wet. But just think about like a kitchen sponge, and if you wring it out, what it feels like after that, that's the way you want your compost to be. And our tarp is actually for moisture control. And it helps keep the compost from getting too wet or too dried out. And a lot of times people think it holds the heat in, but it has nothing to do with heat and everything to do with moisture. It's a vapor barrier, basically. So it's going to keep it from getting soggy and over wet in the wintertime, in the rainy season. In our climate, it helps in the summertime from it getting too dried out. So that's what the tarp or roof is for. It's really important for helping you control the moisture. Okay, and then the air. The way that we control the air is so that we can keep the compost aerobic. So aerobic means with air. So you can either turn the compost with a tractor, like in this picture here, which is the way we used to manage our compost. Or you can do some simple things to add a little bit of passive aeration. You can put in PVC pipes, which go into the center of the pile. You can use like a tamping rod and wriggle a hole into the center. There's different kinds of home compost augers that will drill a little hole, a simple little hole into the middle of the compost pile. These are just ways that you want to keep it aerobic. If it becomes anaerobic, that's the stinky compost process, and that just means that you need to do something to put air in it, like turn it with a tractor, maybe put some bigger or some small sticks or like straw in it, and the straw has more air going to be around it because you've got more space that it creates. So you want to have air in your compost. And really all of this is just to say compost happens really easy. It's even less complicated than what I make it sound like. And all you need to kill parasites, pathogens, and weed seeds is about 130, 133 degrees for 3 days, which is not that much. But we try to get it to hot over a longer period of time, because the thing is that it's not a homogeneous substance, and you're going to have pockets that get hot here and then cool down, and then pockets that get hot here and cool down. So you want to just work to try to keep it hot for a period of time. And you can get a garden thermometer if you want, and that's fun because then you can monitor it, and it's amazing to see how quickly it heats up. So after it starts to cool down, when it gets to about 90 degrees or less, I had an artist draw me these guys, because these guys are your friends. They are secondary composters. They're macroinvertebrates that come into your compost pile and they break it down more. They don't kill the weed seeds, parasites, and pathogens, but they do break it down more into a nicer and nicer product. And they are the same organisms that are going to be in a backyard worm bin. Worm bins are recommended for food scraps. And then that's because you don't want to attract rats or opossums or raccoons or your dog or the neighbor's dog. So you don't want to put food scraps in your compost pile. You just want to have herbivore in your compost, herbivore manure in your compost pile. No meat, no bones, no dairy or fat. Those need to go to the landfill. Also dog and cat manure, pig manure. Pigs can share pathogens with us. But veggies, fruit, coffee grounds, eggshells, they can all go in a worm bin. And the cute little worms here, the red worms, they're also called red wigglers. They're the ones that are often sold for fishing worms. Like you can buy them at Walmart here in the fishing department. And that's what goes in worm bins. So sometimes you hear about kids having a project where they're raising worms and selling them for bait and making money at that, which is cool. So finished compost, the way that you know that it's finished is that it's going to be dark colored, evenly textured, crumbly. It's going to not look so much like manure as a little more like soil. It's going to be 90 degrees or less in temperature. And, you know, for most of it, it's going to take, most of us, it's going to take 3 to 6 months to realistically to make this happen. So on the bottom, that's our compost bins. We have an NRCS design compost bin without a roof. It'd be nice if we had a roof. And that's the finished compost on the right there. Okay, here's just a few tips about where to put your compost bins. You want to lay out your compost bins for chore efficiency. So you want it close to your stalls and your confinement areas, your paddocks. So in Maple Valley, that was our barn, and we had stalls inside and paddocks on either side. And we had just a little bit of a hill. So it worked really well to be able to clean our stalls and come out and dump down into our compost bin. You want to be sure to have your compost bin placed well away from the high water mark of creeks or ponds or wetlands, as well as at least 100 feet from your well and your property lines. But you want to check with your county or your housing development that you might be in, because they might have requirements that supersede. These are just guidelines. So compost bins can be built from a whole variety of materials. And there's so many creative designs and ideas that I've seen over the years. This upper left, this one is in Snohomish County. And she used ecology blocks. So sometimes you can get a hold of these. They're usually inexpensive, but once, you know, like I've seen them for free. I've seen them for $75, but they come on specialized equipment that sometimes can be expensive to have that equipment come on your property, and they have to be able to offload it right into place where you want it. And she had a roof, has a roof, and then she also put tarps on it because that she has on a pulley system, because in the summer the sun would still shine in and dry it out. Bottom, left, she's got compost bins made out of cherry timbers, and she puts space in between them to allow for some passive aeration. One on the right, super chore efficient, her covered round pen and stalls and paddocks are in the background. And so she could clean, come, and use gravity to dump down into her compost bins. And then her pastures were off to what would be our left in this picture. Okay, let's talk about my third mud management point, which is using footing. So footing is any kind of material that you use in your heavy use areas, your paddocks, your walkways, anything like that. That's going to prevent erosion and help for some drainage. It's going to allow water, rainwater to drain between the material. So on the left in this picture, it's 5/8 minus crushed rock. And on the right, it's sand. So there's always pluses and minuses. There's not like one footing material that's perfect for everything. But I would say that the 5/8 minus crushed rock is the closest to being the perfect for most situations. So to define a few things, the crushed rock, so these are angular pieces of rock, and I like the angular better because they lock together. Round rock tends to migrate quite a bit. The size of this 5/8 is enough so that small enough so that it'll still fall between the tines of your manure fork. If you get it much bigger than that, you're going to end up picking manure and all of your expensive gravel and then putting that in your compost, which isn't exactly where you want it. Let's see, what else do I want to say? The minus means that you have all the smaller particles in there. So the biggest thing that you have is 5/8 of an inch, and then you have all the way down to the minus. And that's going to help because it helps lock it in place so the material doesn't migrate. So if you have a hill, you're going to want something with the minus in it so it doesn't migrate. If you get sand or round rock, it's going to migrate an awful lot. You're going to have a problem with that going downhill and not staying where you want it. But if you have a flat surface, you could get 5/8 washed. So that means that everything there is just 5/8 of an inch. And that means it's going to drain a little bit better than with the minus. So ask us some questions if that doesn't make sense, and we will answer that at the end. And the sand, I mean, it's all, sand is a real traditional footing. I think I do have some other pictures of sand that we'll look at too. And horses really like sand a lot. The problem with sand is if you have it any place where you're feeding horses, they can risk ingesting it. It can also migrate if you've got a hillside. And I guess those are the two biggest ones. Here's another example of 5/8 minus crushed rock, and she's got a nice slope there for drainage. This is our property in Maple Valley, and we had in one of our paddocks we had manufactured sand. So what that means is that when they are crushing rock, they're going to end up with a certain amount of byproduct, that's sand. So they've manufactured the sand. Whereas like beach sand is going to be round, manufactured sand is a little bit more angular. So we built an area for this horse that was in a raised bed kind of area. he actually had laminitis, and so that was to help his feet, and it did help a lot. He healed from that laminitis because of that paddock we created for him. Coarse washed sand. Here's what we have pretty much in all of our paddocks. I mean, it's not like it's perfect, but it works really well here. And horses love to sleep in it. It's soft. I think it's easier to pick up manure in the wintertime if with a sand paddock than with a gravel paddock if you live someplace where it's frozen in the wintertime. But if you live someplace where it rains a lot, the sand is going to get tracked into your stalls and where they eat. So on the questions, I think it's going to be best if we wait to the end and take them then. So either throw your question into the chat or hang on to it and we'll get to it at the end.
My fault, Alayne. Sorry about that. I asked people to raise their hand, so.
Oh, I think it'll be easier at the end if that's
That's
okay.
fine. Yeah, that's no
Okay.
problem. We've got one question in the chat, and then I think there will be another one
Okie dokie.
after you.
So if you do have sand, you gotta really pay attention that you are feeding your horses so they're not ingesting sand. We use these corner feeders so that hay doesn't get dirty. A few more ideas about footing. Sometimes the heavy use area where you have your horses might be pretty big, and it wouldn't be cost effective to put footing in the whole paddock. And that's what we have with one of our with two of them actually. They're really big, and we couldn't afford to put footing across the whole thing. We do manure management across both of them, but we only put the footing in the highest areas. So we start out the winter with putting it in this end and then in the other end where the shelter and the water are. And then if and when it gets really wet and our clay soil will just turn into like quicksand. So maybe you can see in the inset picture here, we throw up a hot wire and just make it a smaller confinement area until that area dries out in the wintertime. So on confinement areas, you want to make sure that gates and fencing are sized so you can still access it with equipment. You're going to need to bring in new footing each fall and refresh those areas that have turned into like a soup bowl. You want to fill them up so that things are even pretty much in your confinement areas. And so you want to be able to access that pretty easily. Stall mats are another mud management option, another footing option. So you can see in this picture, she's got kind of a veranda underneath the overhang, and then she puts an apron of stall mats around the outside of that. So it's just a mud management technique that's helpful. And then she sweeps it once a day when she does her manure management. Here's another example of stall mats in a high traffic area under the overhang. Light Hoof is a product, the person who created it lives in Snohomish County, and it's become, I mean, I remember when she came up with it, and it's become a sensation all over the country, really. And it's a kind of a geotextile product, and there's many different kinds, but how Light Hoof works is that you put down geotextile fabric. You can see it in the background here. Then you spread out the Light Hoof. You pull it apart. It's kind of like an egg crate. Zip tie it together, and then you fill it with gravel. This is a property that the entire property is uses Light Hoof, and it's as much of a slope as it looks like here, and that's Bear Creek at the bottom. And so that's really helping with reducing mud and pollution. Here's another example. There's light hoof under this, and it's in basically around the coffee pot to help prevent mud there. Okay, my fourth tip, and I mean, in many cases, this is like one of the first things that we look at when we go to a horse property is, are there gutters and downspouts? It makes a huge difference to have gutters and downspouts and to divert that away. So environmentally speaking, that rainwater is clean, and we want to keep it clean and not allow it to get contaminated with mud and manure. So we want to capture it with a gutter and then a downspout, and then direct it away to someplace vegetated on your property where it can soak back into the footprint of your property. Here's an example. This is in on Tiger Mountain in Issaquah, and this property, you can look it up and figure out, or the conservation district can help you. You can figure out how much rain falls in your area over a year. And in this area, in Issaquah, the charts say she gets 14,000 gallons of rainwater a year on half of her barn. So, you know, she's got a 4-stall barn and horses on in 2 stalls on one side. So you can imagine that it's going to make a huge difference for mud management if she's got these gutters and downspouts and diverts it away. Also notice how she has lights. That's a great thing for chore efficiency, an important thing for chore efficiency in the wintertime, so that when you come home from work, you can still do your horse chores. And then options for where to outlet those downspouts. What this farm did is they tight lined it underneath the driveway. That means they put it in a pipe that didn't have any holes. And then they outletted it on the other side of the driveway in the foreground. And basically what's behind me in the picture is all trees and native vegetation on their property. So you want to daylight it someplace on your property where it's going to soak back into the footprint of your property. So this is a cattle barn in Puget Sound, and she's got a confinement area in the background and gutters and downspouts, and she buries the outlet tight lined under the driveway. And then where I am, I'm taking this picture, I'm crouched down in a native plant vegetated buffer, and that's where she's outletted it to. This is our property here in Southwest Idaho. So we've got gutters and downspouts. They slope to the back of the barn, and it's all vegetation back there. And it goes along kind of a vegetated swale. Other ideas for what you can do with roof runoff include cisterns and rain barrels. Rain barrels you don't really need any engineering for, but cisterns you do want to make sure that you have some help, and you can get that engineering help from your conservation district again. But the farm in the lower right hand side, they use all their water from those 2 little sheds to manage their livestock and their garden. Then when you do have downspouts and they're in your confinement area, you do want to be sure to protect them, because your animals will itch on them otherwise, and smush them right away. And there's many ways you can do that. You can divert the downspout out of the paddock. You can protect it with a PVC pipe in the last picture, or you can build a wood protection around it like here. Okay, we're down to my last point, and that is about ways to look at rerouting surface water runoff so that you keep it clean. So example, in this picture, I'm standing up at high ground, and the barn and confinement areas are in the low ground. So in the wintertime on this Western Washington property, when it rains, water's all going to run downhill towards that confinement area. And they actually, well, they have grass, that's one thing, and that helps to slow it down. But they also have a French drain around the outside of it, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So, or I'll talk about it right now. French drains, dry wells, water diversion bars, culverts, rain gardens, and native trees and shrubs are all wonderful ways of keeping that clean surface water clean and diverting it away from your heavy use areas and your animals. So here's an example of a French drain. This one was in Woodinville. Yeah, it was in Woodinville. And I went out with the King Conservation District when they had a pretty big problem where, so they were at the bottom of a hillside. And what happened was when they moved in, it's an older house. It was treed behind them, you know, forested. But then somebody bought that land and developed it and put in houses. Well, the trees use water and slow it down, and the houses have more impervious surface. So that meant that now all that rainwater, surface water is all running towards their place. And what was happening is it was all collecting like in the corner of their little covered arena and then running into the stalls and the tack room in the barn. And it was just a soggy mess in there. So what the Conservation District recommended was, first of all, they didn't have gutters and downspouts. They recommended that. And then they recommended a French drain around the outside of their arena. And so that French drain acts to intercept the surface water that's running down slope, as well as subsurface water that might be running towards their property. And then it takes it away, a long ways away to the front of the house, and it daylights and outlets it in the front yard, basically, of their property. So it's keeping that water on the footprint of their property so it soaks back in, but it's diverting it away from a high traffic area where it can get contaminated with mud and manure. Hopefully that makes sense. There are so many designs and ideas for French drains on the internet, but also the Conservation District and NRCS, wherever you live, they can help you with that. We had a French drain on our property. I don't think in Maple Valley. I don't think I have pictures of it, but the NRCS did the design for ours there in Washington. Dry wells are another surface water management idea. We have them here in Idaho around all of our water hydrants. So this is round rock, like drain rock, which would be in your septic system. And it's round, so there's a lot of pore space in between each rock. So water will run down into it and help drain away, so you're not creating mud. So dry wells are only going to work if you have well draining soil, but if you have a really high water table in the wintertime, they're not going to work. Water bars. I love water bars. They're so simple. This one is actually in Snohomish County too. One of the former farm planners had horses, and he made these water bars for his driveway. He took stall mats, attached them to a board, and buried them in his driveway so that he could still drive over it with his car. It was flexible. But then when it would rain, it just made a little bit of a channel so that the water would hit that and then run off the driveway into the vegetation. And he said the reason why he did it was because he just got tired of putting down gravel on the driveway. And then every time there would be a big downpour, the gravel would end up at his neighbor's house down the street. Here's another water diversion bar. And here's what's happening here is when it rains hard, water from this road and paved area would all run into the barn. So she just did something simple. She put up a curb. She just brought cement curbing from Lowe's or Home Depot, and then it just diverts the water over to this vegetated area, which isn't very fancy, but you could make it nicer if you wanted. A culvert is just like what it says. So this is the gentleman that has the Frisians, and because that confinement area where the horses are gets compacted, it starts not draining real well, so water pools in it. So what he did was he put in a culvert under the driveway and brought the water out to the other side of the driveway, and then he made it a landscaping area where he planted different kinds of landscaping plants, and he just wove that water through there. Plants will clean up dirty water. They'll use nutrients and sediments. And then at the other end was his pasture, so it's eventually draining into his pasture. Rain gardens are another way to deal with runoff. So this is also in Snohomish County, one of the early rain gardens. So in this situation, it's from the roof of the barn, and it's going into a rain garden is a specific type of planned area with compost and healthy soil and plants that like to have their feet wet. And the idea is that it captures the rainwater, and over a day or 2 days, the water slowly is utilized by the plants and the soil there. It's not like a pool. It's not meant to hold water. It's meant to utilize it and put it back into the natural hydrology. So I'm a big fan of native trees and shrubs as mud managers. There's lots that you can look to your conservation district and talk to them, and they can help you about. Snohomish CD has an awesome tree sale each year. You can have them help you get, if you've got an area of your property maybe where water tends to pool or collect, you can get water loving plants or plants that don't mind having their feet wet, like cedar or dogwood in this picture, or many other plants that willow, nine bark. These are all plants that like to have their feet wet and are happy about that. And one of the reasons why I like native plants, well, one reason is native plants are designed to live in our areas. They don't need herbicide, they don't need fertilizer, and the native animals in our area depend on those native plants. So that's a big part of why we like native plants. They're going to grow real easily for you. But another reason is that they use a lot of water. Like a mature Douglas fir will use up to 250 gallons of water a day. They might use less in the wintertime, but they keep using water year round. They don't go dormant like a deciduous tree does. So native plants are your friends, and they can work for you. So we put in a native plant, mostly native planting plan on our property here in southwestern Idaho. This is what it looked like when we bought it the first winter. So I knew that we had a really low rainfall. It's a shrub steppe ecosystem, so that's like 7 to 11 inches of precipitation a year. And I thought, oh, coming from Western Washington, that's going to be a piece of cake. Because we could get 5 inches in a night in Western Washington. But my first winter was quite an eye-opener, because the clay soil, when it gets wet, it just turns into like quicksand. And so that's what our property looked like before. That was the nightmare that we had the first winter. but we set about right away changing things up. We changed the size and the shape of our paddock so that the horses weren't on the slope. We planted all sorts of trees and native shrubs and grasses on that slope so that it'll capture the water and the runoff. We planted evergreens as well as deciduous plants and ones that would be good for wildlife. And we bought bigger plants because I wanted to have the visual buffer between us and our neighbors, as well as a windscreen and a sunscreen. And that's what it looks like today in the summertime. And so that's 15 years later. All right, so that's the end of this presentation. Just as a quick review, we talked about confinement areas. We talked about picking up manure and composting it. We talked about footing. We talked about gutters and downspouts, and we talked about different ways to manage surface flows. So the important take-home point is that I hope I can leave with you on this is that mud manure management is important for our horses' health and for chore efficiency, but it's also super important to keep non-point pollution out of our really important and wonderful water bodies like Puget Sound in this picture. So we want to do what we can to be good neighbors and take care of the natural world around us, as well as taking care of our horses. So I have a lot of resources with Horses for Clean Water. I also have a newsletter. That's the QR code for the newsletter. And we have a masterclass series coming up next month, starting October 20th, that goes into more, it's 6 weeks, and it goes into more detail on mud manure and pasture management. And I've had a lot of farm planners, a lot of conservation district staff take it, as well as I've been teaching it for, I guess, 15 years. And I've had a lot of people come through it and help them with that, with their properties. We also have a library of tip sheets, which are really awesome, about 32 different titles. There's a couple of them listed there. So you might want to check those out. And there's the Snohomish CD's contact information. Catherine, do you want to do questions now and then go on to the next presentation?
Yes, we have a couple that are specific to this presentation.
All right.
Lennis asks, what's the best footing for barefoot horses? Is the 5/8 minus gravel okay for barefoot equines?
Yeah, it is, but it kind of just depends on your horses. But 5/8 minus, that's pretty much why what we've found with that footing. I mean, in Snohomish County, actually, Pilchuck Vet, they used to have a reproductive facility, and they put all 5/8 minus in there, and that was mares and foals. So yeah, it's good for all horses. I've seen sometimes where there's laminitic horses where they maybe need to have sand, but you know, that's why farm tours, that's the beauty of farm tours, because you can go and see some of these practices in place and see what you think and see if it's going to work for you. And you know, a lot of times you see things that will work for you, and then when you see it in place, you're like, ah, that'll never work with my horses. So it's not like one size fits all, but 5/8 is pretty good.
Okay, thank you. Yes, and I'll mention that the farm tour on October 11th, their facility, they have 40 horses or so. So they've got some different kinds of footings. I think it's mostly based on cost, what they're able to afford for their large facility. So you'll see some different ideas there that, you know, they make it work for their situation. The next question, which you kind of answered, but maybe there's some a deeper dive into this, and Whit, you may be able to help with this too, which is, do you use any fabric underlayment under the rock in a heavy use area?
Maybe I'll go first and then Whit can go first. Some conservation districts across the country actually require it. I think that's maybe dependent on, what the predominant type of soil is in their in their county. I have never used it. I think what happens is you have like two choices. Either you use a geotextile and you put in less footing, or you don't use geotextile and you end up putting in a lot more footing over time. So that's the long and the short of it. There is an art to putting geotextile in. You want to make sure you do it right. Otherwise, it's not going to work, or it's going to come up and your horses will destroy it. So, yeah, Whit, what do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add that on the visits that I've been out on, people have typically been recommended to have a geotextile underneath, just for what you were saying. Like, not having it means the gravel is kind of getting punched down into the earth, and you're going to run through your gravel a lot more quickly. I need to keep replenishing it more frequently.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you have clay soils or really organic soils, it's going to be a lot more valuable for you, and you might want to consider it. But I definitely work with your conservation district on that, because it's expensive and it's a lot of work to put it in. So you want to put it in correctly so you get your money's worth out of it. Any other questions?
I don't see any more in the chat. Does anybody have any before we move on to equine enrichment? And you can ask, if you think of something more, we can answer more questions at the end of that portion of the presentation.
Okay, let's see. Let me bring it up on both of my screens. Here a second. Guess I should have been doing that while Whit was talking.
No
Okay.
worries, we can vamp.
Yeah, all right, got it. Let me, whoops. There we go. This is one of my favorite ones to do because it's pretty cool and a lot of fun to think about. So the point of equine enrichment is that you want to do to think about and implement management techniques that are going to support a horse's health as well as emotional well-being, because for so much of the year and so much of their life, we're keeping them in a confinement area. And they're a big animal, they're a super smart animal, and we wouldn't keep a horse in it. I mean, we wouldn't keep a dog in a kennel all the time, or a crate. We know that they go wacko if we do. So the same should be it's the same case for any domesticated animal that we're keeping in confinement. We need to think about enrichment. And this is like a hot new buzzword, hot topic in animal welfare. So real quickly on the confinement areas, this is reviewing what we already talked about, but I'll go through it quickly. So confinement areas are central to horse keeping. We know that they're going to be our friend if we have horses and land. I should just say if we have horses, period. Because this is where they're going to have to spend much of their life. This is where they'll have to be in the wintertime when our pastures soils are soggy. It's where they'll have to be in the summer if they get overweight, or if our pastures are close to being overgrown. So, I mean, our pastures are close to being overgrazed. And then we have to do certain things to mitigate the mud and manure. So we have to have footing and manure management and gutters and downspouts. And I also have pollinator hedgerows in here and rain barrels. And I have violet green swallows for fly control and barn owls for rodent control. And our composting bin, here's the barn owl box, and the trees are fenced off in the pastures so that they can continue to be habitat as well as mud managers, but not get chewed on by the horses. But in the wintertime, when soils are super saturated, hooves of horses can compact the soils and create more mud. Overgrazing on dormant plants in the wintertime causes the roots to get shorter, and then the grass plants aren't going to be as healthy the following year. So these are the reasons why we have confinement areas. But if you have a mismanaged confinement area, they can become muddy. You can get all sorts of diseases and pathogens that are associated with living in these kinds of conditions. And then, as we talked about, the runoff from muddy pastures can cause water quality issues and can get into the surface water and into creeks and ponds and wetlands, or it can soak into the groundwater and can contaminate our drinking water and our aquifers. And then poorly designed or mismanaged confinement areas are inadequate equine or equid welfare. It's not fair, it's not right for the horse. So what is equine enrichment? It's looking at ways to provide stimulation in a horse's environment, which is going to benefit them psychologically as well as physically. And it's even more important when horses can't get out as often, like in the wintertime, or for horses with metabolic issues, so horses that get overweight really easily and they can't have as much grazing time, or if they don't get exercised as much. So equine enrichment is, let's see, so enrichment opportunities are important for all domesticated animals. It's our responsibility for animal welfare for our confined animals. It doesn't matter what animals you're talking about. And if you guys visit zoos, like I enjoy visiting zoos. It's been so cool in the last 20, 30 years, seeing the changes in zoos and how important enrichment is for all animals. I love to go and see all the enrichment opportunities that are being provided. This is the Knoxville, Tennessee Zoo. Very, very good zoo as far as enrichment opportunities for their animals. And they provide a lot of education to the audience so that people recognize what's going on. So I am going to talk about 8 different equine enrichment ideas, and you guys might have more, or you might have other ways of doing this that might be fun or that you can come up with. I'm going to talk about managing confinement areas real quickly. I'm going to talk about paddock shape and design for enrichment. I'm going to talk about maximizing interaction opportunities, food and feeding options, rolling and scratching areas, toys, friends, turnout, and exercise. Okay, so this is kind of a review again. So for managing our heavy use areas, our confinement areas, we want a high, well-drained, convenient area that's going to be chore efficient for us. Convenient makes it chore efficient. We want to pick up the manure regularly. We want to use footing. We want to have gutters and downspouts and then divert that away. Here's an example of a high, well-drained property with slope, with footing and gutters and downspouts. Here's another example of a confinement area and picking up manure regularly. We already talked about this slide, so I'll go through it. We talked about these footings, 5/8 minus on the left and sand, arena sand on the right. You can also use, we showed different examples before about stall mats for mud management. Here's a property that has a big area with stall mats for mud management. We talked about gutters and downspouts. Okay, so now let's talk about paddock shape, design, and routine, and how we can change things up. So in the lower left, we talked about the gentleman with the Frisians and how he uses his heavy use area doubles as a round pen / arena where he can ride or work his horses. We also talked the top one, how that lady had individual pens for her horses, but then midday she either turned them out on pasture in the summer or she turned them out in her big outdoor arena together midday, and then they all went back into their individual pens in the evening. The middle picture here is a cool one. That's from the Seattle Mounted Police, and they have an indoor arena, covered arena, with the stalls around the indoor arena inside. And then during the day, all of their horses go into these pens. They each have an individual shelter with a big turnout area. So they're changing things up, is what I'm trying to point out in these examples. Here's another example. This is in Redmond, Washington. This is Little Bit. And all of their horses are in stalls at night. But during the day, every day of the year, they all have an individual paddock with a shelter. And no matter what kind of weather, they all go out every day into their outdoor paddock with a shelter. And when I took this picture, they had something like 50 horses there. This is also in Redmond. This is Farrell McWhirter Park, and it's another commercial place. And they teach lessons and have horses for different equine programs. And they have individual pens. I actually happen to like these open ones that, some places they call them mare motels, which I think is kind of a degrading name for them. But I like them because they provide a lot of good ventilation. It's excellent ventilation. And a lot of stimulation because the horses can see things that are going on. So it gives them things to look at and think about. And they can touch their neighbor. They can mutually groom. And then they open up those pens. They're in there at night during feeding times, and then they're opened into a big confinement area as a group during the day. Track paddocks, I have, we'll talk about track paddocks right now. So if you're not familiar with track paddocks, the idea about track paddocks is, it was made famous by one gentleman, Jamie Jackson. He wrote a book in 2006 called Paddock Paradise. He's since rewritten the book, and there's a new release. It's just a couple of years old, I believe. And he was a farrier, a barefoot farrier, and he observed, or a barefoot trimmer, and he observed Mustangs and how they traveled. And he felt that having horses in basically a confinement area or a heavy use area that's shaped like a track he felt it's a good idea because it keeps them moving. And it provides more enrichment and more stimulation. And so here's 2 examples. I'm going to show you some more examples. Actually, I'm going to show you these 2 in more detail, so I'll wait to explain that. So that's Jamie Jackson, quite a few years ago. And that's Wild Horses on the bottom. And basically, you know, this is his idea of coming up with something that's similar to what wild horses would need. So here's my advice on designing a track paddock. You know, it's not for everybody in every situation with, it depends on the kind of soil that you have. It also depends on the type of horses you have. Are they going to get along together? I mean, some horses just don't. We have a couple of geldings that are like, they're always into trouble and messing with stuff and messing with the other horses. But then I have other horses that are just super good at getting along with other people. So, you know, it just depends on your situation and how many horses you have and their age and their breed and their temperament. But here's some of my suggestions for considerations if you're designing a track paddock. So first of all, you need to have soil that's well draining, like gravelly soil, a droughty kind of soil is a well draining soil. The soils you wouldn't want would be like clay soils, like really what we have. It's hard in the wintertime here, or mucky soils. If your soils get super wet really easily, it's going to be challenging to do a track paddock. And then your available land, you want to shape your track paddock around buildings or perhaps an arena or the perimeter of a pasture. The width is going to depend again on the age, the breed, the temperament. The narrower your track paddock is, the more it makes a horse feel confined, and so the more they're going to move. The wider it is, the more it creates a loafing area for them. So, you know, you just want to think about that. If you have a horse that tends to be more dominant and corner other horses, you might need to have a wider track paddock. I mean, the whole idea of a track paddock is that you want them to move more. So there's different ways that you can do that. You can have feeding points in different areas, which is what we do. You can have poles in there for them to step over, anything that might make them curious. We have a little hill in ours, and they go on the top of the hill, and then they look at the horses in the next property, on the neighbor's property. And I'll show you some of these things in a minute. You also want to think about cost and chore efficiency, because bigger, in my opinion, isn't necessarily better, because it's going to be more work for you to clean the whole thing or to maintain it, because, you know, you're probably going to need footing, at least in some areas. You're going to need more fencing. So all these things are something to think about when designing your track. Also, seasonal use. You might only be able to use your track during dry periods, like during the summer. There's some people are here, I don't know them, but I notice that they have a track paddock and they only use it in the summer, and not in the winter, because the clay soils are too difficult to deal with. So let's look at some examples. This is a property in Preston, Washington, and she put it's a 5-acre property. She put a track around the majority of it. The white fence is the track. The green is the neighbor's property, or is their property boundary. And so the track goes around her outdoor arena and her shop and her trail course. So it's right in this area. Hopefully you guys can see my pointer. And here's some pictures of her track. She even had a little bit of grass in the corner of it. She used to have it wide open and then realized that they were hanging out here more than she wanted. So she made it more narrow, and then planted grass in there. And these are just different sections of her track. Here's another track, a little hard. It'd be best to have drone pictures of this overhead, but she put in a really beautiful, expensive, all season outdoor arena with really expensive drainage. And then she realized when she did that, that she actually had the makings of a track around the outside. So this is the arena, and this is the track around the outside of the arena. And here's more parts to the track. This one is in Goldendale, Washington, and they have a big piece of property. I'm thinking it's like 20 acres, and their track is kind of like a figure 8 around the property. They don't have any footing in it, and they got curly horses. That was the first time I'd ever seen a curly. They look like equine sheep or something. But the track goes all the way around the perimeter of their pastures in a figure 8 kind of idea. And this is our property. We have a track on a small paddock. Gosh, it's like, I mean, it's not even a quarter of an acre, I don't think, or maybe it's a quarter of an acre, but it's the upper left-hand side where the green line is. And we have a shelter in there. And let me show you. So this is how to create a track paddock. We had this big paddock that we kept horses in, and all they did was just stand down here by the coffee pot and the feeder. And so all we did was pick up manure and the whole big thing. It was just kind of a waste of a space. So I talked Matt into creating a track paddock, and what we did was we fenced off the interior. We used our compost. We seeded with dryland grass seed because we weren't going to be able to irrigate that. We did all that ourselves by hand. And we have a portable fence charger that we have on it. And this is basically what it looked like after a year or so. And the horses began moving more, just creating that. They tend to go counterclockwise, which is what, if any of you guys follow Temple Grandin, she's a PhD from Colorado State in animal behavior, and that's what she talks about, that animals like to go counterclockwise. But we also put feeders in different areas to help create movement. And this is about what it looks like now. I need to take a picture like right now, and I keep forgetting because the native plants in it have finally gotten nice. We had years and years and years of bad weeds in it because the seed bed of weed seeds had built up in there. But it's really pretty now. And so I need to take some pictures, some current pictures. But some other ideas that I have had along the way of where you might be able to create a track paddock. Like if you go to Kentucky, all of their pastures, they always put in these like 15 or 20 foot wide areas. I think it's for equipment, and so horses don't sniff noses over fences. But this in between area would make a great track paddock with or without grass. Also, the bottom picture, that's in Oregon. And I saw a farm that had one big grazing area and a road, a utility road or a service road out there to it that went around the outside. And I was like, man, that would make such an awesome track paddock. But here's a farm in Maple Valley who used their service road and turned it into a track paddock. He had a driveway that went to the back of his property, and in the wintertime he turned it into a track paddock. Okay, my third equine enrichment idea is to maximize interaction opportunities. And this can be with people or with horse neighbors or wildlife. It's basically different ways to encourage interaction. And a few of the examples, the two examples I have here, the one on the left is our round pen. And just by happy accident, we put our round pen really in the middle of our property. So there's always people coming or going, walking past that round pen. Our neighbors are on the other side. So there's lawnmowers, there's delivery trucks, there's whatever. And then our property is not far either. So we've got a swimming pool and all sorts of stuff. So this is where we start young horses like colts or Mustangs. Matt started lots of Mustangs. We have quite a few. So having them living in this round pen is excellent equine enrichment because they're seeing all these things, they're hearing them, they're getting exposed to it. Other ideas for interaction is if you can, maybe you can have a stall guard on your stall, like in the lower right-hand side. So then that's encouraging your horses to stick their heads out and interact with you or others on your property. As far as a design for a barn, I really like these open situations. It's excellent ventilation, and a horse's respiratory system is kind of their Achilles heel. But this kind of design, horses can reach over and they can mutually groom, they can sniff. You know, they've got everything, and they can see what's going on around them. They can see our neighbor's sheep, they can see the other neighbor's alpacas. So it's really good for equine enrichment. Here's another good design at another property for equine enrichment and ventilation. Here's a stall that I think is good for equine enrichment. First of all, it has good ventilation. It doesn't go all the way to the ceiling, so that allows for more ventilation. And it has those, I mean, they're still bars, but at least they're bars, so the horse can see the next horse. They can sniff each other. They can stick their head out. It's good for ventilation, and it's good for seeing, touching, smelling their neighbors. Okay, foods and feeding options. There's lots of different ideas that you can try and think about. First of all, small frequent meals are going to be best for your horse. If you've got 10 horses or a boarding facility, it's not going to be easy to do many different meals. We do 3 meals a day. Some of my friends who only have 1 or 2 equines, they do like 5 times a day. The more frequently you can feed your horse, the better that's going to be for them, health-wise as well as enrichment-wise. But you can try other things, like you can try different feeding stations in different areas. You can try different kinds of food types like hay cubes or low quality hay for some chew time, and you can put that in a different feeder. You can try browsing, and there's a lot of research that shows that horses are actually more of a browser than a grazer, and we've always referred to them as grazers. But you could get an umbrella stand and put different kinds of branches in there that are edible. You want to be really, really careful about that. But willow, cottonwood, bamboo, or blackberry vines are examples of plants that horses can eat. And then there's healthy treats like watermelon, plums, peaches. They shouldn't have the pits, though, that they can be dangerous. Bananas, grapes, celery. Bananas, they will eat the whole banana like a monkey. I mean, it's just crazy. And they can be, black. They can be old bananas. orange pumpkins. You can even make treats like the one on the left there. That's a watermelon frozen ice treat in the summer. And then slow feeders. Slow feeders are really important for enrichment. What it's doing is it's mimicking natural grazing, because in the wild, horses ate a little bit at a time, and they would walk, between like one clump of grass and another clump of grass, and they'd walk for 100 yards or a mile or whatever. So slow feeders restrict their grazing and slow it down, but still allow them food for a longer period of time. And, they have all these things, in particular, having food over a longer period of time helps to reduce stress and boredom and ulcers and other kinds of bad behaviors. So here's some examples of slow feeders. Basically using hay nets, but double bagging them, or getting hay nets with smaller holes. Nibble Nuts is a brand, and they sell a lot of different kinds of slow feeders. Hay Chicks is another brand of slow feeder. Porter Grazer is a very popular one that you see a lot. Basically, you put the hay into the barrel, and then you kind of screw that lid in, and so the horses pull the hay out of those plastic openings. Nag bag is also really popular. So a nag bag can put it like a whole bale of hay in a nag bag, and then you can hang it like that. Or here's some people that were visiting us that used nag bags for their horses all day long. They had hay in front of them. Here's a hay pillow for Minnie, which I thought was really cute and really a good idea. This one I thought was a good design. It goes into a water trough, basically. Hay burners, equine. It's just a net that goes across the top of the trough. And you can also get hay bags to go over big bales or round bales if you want. And then there are automatic feeders. Actually, my girlfriend, her husband made an automatic feeder so that she can feed her horses real early in the morning and she doesn't have to get up. But this kind of feeder will feed up to five different times a day. So in the middle of the day, I think they feed one of their feedings at like 3 a.m. Rolling and scratching opportunities is a fifth point, and there's so many cool things that you can do. This is a lot of the street sweepers. You can get those things, and then when they're spent, and then you can just slide them over a post, and then horses can itch on them. You can buy itchy things. You can make them out of a plastic doormat or from an old brush. Sand piles, horses love to roll in sand piles. So you can make an area of your paddock that has a pile in it that they can go and roll in. Here's one in our paddocks. Here's another one. I really like this design. They've got the 5/8 minus and then the sand in the foreground. Horse toys. There's lots of different horse toys. Really, the ones that seem to work best are the ones that are associated with food, like the food ball in the bottom picture. Here's some other horse toys that I've seen over the years. Again, the ones with food are the ones that are, or salt licks or sugar licks too, are the ones that are probably going to get the most amount of use. Here's a cool idea that one of my friends did. She had a track paddock and pasture, and then when she opened it up to get out to the pasture, they had to jump over the barrels in order to get out. Either way, to come back in, they had to jump over the barrels. And friends is my 7th point. And friends can be other equids. They can be other horses. They can be other equids like donkeys. Or they can be other animals. Horses will easily adopt other friends like goats or cats or dogs. The upper picture of that horse, the cat, she only had one horse, and that cat just adopted the horse and would ride around on the horse's back. The bottom picture, my friend's horse, that's my dog, and it was my dog. And my friend's horse would pick up Sally's squeaky toy, squeak it, and then throw it for Sally. And it's just an example of how easily horses adopt other companions. And then my last point is winter turnout and exercise ideas. And, it takes more effort and it takes the right clothes, but it's really important that we keep interacting with them and doing things with them in the wintertime, whether it's turning them out in the snow or riding them on safe footing in the weather. Turning them out either by themselves or with other horses. We use our outdoor arena and our indoor arena and our round pen for turnout. Also, I'm a big advocate of groundwork and doing work in hand or with obstacles, or liberty is when the horses are loose and you work with them. So these are all things that you can do any time of the year, but particularly in the wintertime to provide the horses with more enrichment. And then just spending quality time with your horse is so important. I think we forget about that sometimes, that's maybe what they really want the most. So, well, actually what they want the most probably is grass. That's what horses always want. So simple green grass is the best enrichment that a horse can have. And we can still use winter pastures as long as the soils aren't soggy and the grasses aren't being overgrazed below 3 to 4 inches. You want to be careful if you have horses with metabolic issues. Because if it's below 30, if it's freezing at night, your grass plants can develop a lot of sugar in them. So you want to be careful about that. So just as a review, we talked about confinement areas and how to manage them. We talked about the shapes and designs. We talked about interaction and food and feeding options, rolling and scratching, toys, friends, turnout, and exercise. So I hope this helps you get some ideas of the biological and behavioral needs of our horses, so that we can help them live better lives and do this through improving our management and handling in our day-to-day activities. So here's my resources again, and again, there's my newsletter, QR code, and code for our master class. And Catherine, what questions do we have? It looks like there's a few there.
It's mostly questions about combining an arena and a heavy use area, and it's a specific situation working with a different conservation district. There may be mitigating reasons why they don't recommend it, but can you maybe you can say more about when it might be a viable option and when it might not be?
Oh, I've
You
seen,
can,
yeah,
go ahead.
I've seen that a lot. Particularly like if you have a smaller piece of property, that's a great idea for having a heavy use area that also works as your turnout or arena, but you really do want to make sure that you take good care of that footing, because the more you use an arena, the more that footing is going to break down, particularly if you don't pick up the manure. It's just going to turn into mud, and then it's not going to be useful for anything. Maybe Whit has some thoughts on that.
So the only thought that I had was that there's a difference between what might be fundable by a cost share program or by an NRCS program, and what a person might want to build. And so there are certain standards that have to be adhered to when implementing a project that's being funded with NRCS or with other public funds. So that's just something to keep in mind. That's certainly not to say that you can't pursue that on your own, depending on permitting.
Yeah, good. Any other questions, Catherine?
I don't see any other questions in the chat. Thank you, Cynthia. Anybody else have some questions? All right, it looks like we don't. I will send out the link to the recording along with resources for everybody, and then I'll try to answer some of your specific questions, the things that you need. If you were specifically asking about compost bins, we'll see if I can gather some additional resources for you and send that out tomorrow or Friday. Thank you everyone for coming. This was really nice to have you all here. Thank you, Alayne. It is always a pleasure to work with you. You were just a joy, and I learned many things new from you every single time.
I'm so glad.
And thank you for being
guys.
here.
I see all your nice comments. I